freight efficiency with NACFE's Mike Roth and Friends.
Here in episode 108, we're joined by Andrew Halonen. He's president of Mayflower Consulting, where we talk about his passion for lightweighting and why he sees himself as a technology matchmaker. He also talks about a new technology for trailers called origami, the importance of keeping an open mind when it comes to new materials, sustainability, and lightweighting, and the role of AI in helping to find cost savings and sustainable solutions. Today we have joining us Andrew Halonen. He's president of Mayflower Consulting, and Andrew and I go back a little ways. We're going to get into that right off the start here, but it's I always enjoy talking to you, Andrew. You tell me something I don't know, you make me think, and I'm glad to have you on.
Thank you, Mike. I appreciate it. And I credit you and the NACFE team to teaching me a whole lot about trucking.
You know, I got to admit, I didn't know what I was doing when I started this nonprofit NACFE. I literally went and bought, Running a Nonprofit for Dummies book, believe it or not. And I just read it cover to cover in like 3 days because I didn't want to mess up what the founders had given. And in hindsight, it's awfully much like running a private business. But it is different in many ways. And one of the things I was trying to figure out is, how would we make a huge impact knowing that, it was going to be difficult fundraising for a nonprofit like this that's completely unbiased and so forth. So, one of the things I remember doing is saying, okay, well, we're going to do that. We're going to use contractors, people who are really smart and want to do the work, but they're willing to do it part-time and so forth. And I'm going to ask you how we met, but I know once we met, it was a really good relationship where you had expertise that we needed. We had some opportunities for you, I suppose, and that's gone real well. But okay, so how did we meet? Do you know? I ask every friend that's on this podcast, and to tell you the truth, Andrew, I could not remember. Usually I do remember. This one I couldn't. Do you?
Yeah, I do remember. So I remember seeing promotions on NACFE on trucking. And somewhere I saw a big presentation. There was a PDF and I downloaded it and I read the whole thing. I'm like, who are these guys? They're not even talking about lightweighting. And so it was aero and all these meaningful things, but not lightweighting. And so I reached out to you and said, hey, you're missing the boat. Why aren't you talking about lightweighting? And then you said, well, our board hasn't decided that we should study lightweighting. I'll let you know if they do.
No, I was passing the buck to somebody else, huh?
Well, that's reality. And yet you kept in touch. And then one day you reached out to me and said, hey, Andrew, if you were going to cut weight on a truck, what would you do? And I don't remember exactly what I said, but I had about 6 things. And you said, pretty good list. All right. Well, I think we're going to study lightweighting. We'll let you know when it comes up.
Yeah. I think what was the trigger there, and I still believe this, is that due to multiple factors. So that would have been maybe 2014 or 13, something like that. So 12 years ago. And I remember it was either just me thinking about it or maybe talking to Dave Schaller or Rick Mihalik in those very early days, had this sort of strike me that, there was a lot of reasons why tractors in particular and trailers to some extent were getting heavier. And I remember in our first report that you authored, we detailed that quite a bit, that, trucks were getting bigger, the sleeper compartments were getting bigger. And that means, there's just more space for the driver to put stuff in there. All that stuff weighs something. I remember, secondly, that, the exhaust emissions were adding a lot of weight. Diesel particulate filters, DEF systems, all those things with their associated tanks and brackets and fluids and all that added weight. Just a lot of other things. Maybe we had like a miscellaneous category where, it seemed like every component on the truck was getting smart. So we were adding, electronic control modules to transmissions and engines. And it just felt like everything was getting heavier on the truck. And at the same time, fleets were maybe being more diligent and getting more freight in the truck. And it was just an aha moment for us. And that's what led to that first report. Tell us about, your career and how you came to doing this work, kind of very specifically on lightweighting of vehicles.
So I'm a mechanical engineer from Michigan Tech. I interned at both Ford Motor Company and 3M Company. I went to work at 3M in St. Paul doing machine design, and I transferred to the Detroit area as a application engineer in automotive. In that job was the big aha moment that I was the liaison. I was on site at Ford a lot, traveled all over the world, Japan, Mexico, a lot of places with that project. But I realized I'm not the engineer. That's not what I want to be. I want to be this matchmaker, this technology matchmaker. And so I got involved in a aluminum composite brake caliper project with Daimler, 3M, and a big brake player, and just started to investigate what's the benefit here. It was all about weight and about package space and so on. And that was about 2001 timeframe ish when the Chrysler 300C came out with the large wheels. Again, that was a design studio change, but they make the wheels really big. That meant the rim had a lot of space in there. And then they could just make the caliper out of just plain aluminum with no composite. But it sort of opened my eyes to composites, lightweighting, all kinds of things, and how the business case was so hard. It didn't, so I guess I learned a lot there, but the biggest thing I learned is that I'm really the technology matchmaker, not the engineer, and also that I love materials. I mean, I get accused of being a metallurgist, which is far from the truth, but I do love materials, and I love the whole idea of we got this great material, where does it fit, and is there a business case for it?
Yeah, yeah. I recently had Elaine Jones on my podcast, and she talked about it earlier in her career, and she and I worked very closely at International Truck on this, where she led a group that was dealing with target costing before engineering even started concepting. A new truck at the time is what we were working on in the late '90s. And what that is that you look at the value that you think you're going to bring to the product with this design change or with this new program. And then you cascade down or break up the what the should be costs in order to sell it in the marketplace. So, for instance, on this brake thing, if you were doing target costing, you would look at it and say, okay, well, I'm bringing aluminum and lightweighting and this, that, and the other, and so oftentimes the engineers think that's going to be a lot more valuable to the customer than it ultimately ends up being because that's
Yep.
their baby and the thing they're designing. So having an upfront target cost. And I was actually, when I was talking to her about that, I was thinking of you as well. So, how often is weight looked at in the early stages of product design? I'm going to guess not very often. And that's what kind of gets us into these weight issues sometimes on vehicles because we design for cost, we design for performance, we design for other things. And oftentimes I think engineers on subsystems probably think, well, if I got to add a bracket or add weight or go to this or go to that, that's not a big deal. It's only a few pounds. Well, if every part on the truck or car adds a couple pounds, then it ends up being hundreds and thousands of pounds, doesn't it? So is that something that you've seen in your career, that early recognition of weight should be a performance metric that engineers use, or are they all you doing that?
They're always doing it. However, it's the business case is more than just the weight. It's cost, it's supply chain, it's a whole bunch of other factors. So if I was talking to a major tier one who's in the commercial truck space, and I just asked because I sell aluminum castings. I'm involved in a lot of lightweight materials. And I said, so how do you think about a new material? And so they're a tier one to an OEM, right? And they're designing axles and brakes and different things. And he said, if the request for proposal doesn't say lightweight, it's ductile iron. End of story. Ductile iron, why? Because you can produce it anywhere in the world. It's strong. It's proven with trillions of miles of success in the trucking market. It's low cost. That's what it is. And then if they ask for lightweight, oh, then it's this expensive stuff called aluminum. Yes, we can propose that, but there's a premium.
Or really expensive, they're called carbon fiber, right?
Right, but so I think weight is always there, but it's always cost effective weight, right? So we got into, I would say trucks and trailers are generally they're lightweight for the business case that it brings.
Yeah, and oftentimes there's a very small part of the market. We called it 5% in our report. I'm not sure how much work we did to come to that number, but that gross out every time. So bulk haulers for hauling fuel around, or other heavy beverages, other heavy where they will spend money. Um, to get another case of Pepsi or another six-pack of beer on the trailer. I'm being maybe a little too specific there, but to get that means real money to them, and they'll pay for a lightweighting feature. Maybe maybe they'll remove a passenger seat if they never use it, or maybe they will go to aluminum on some frame components or something to save some weight and lightweight those tractors. And I've heard you can lightweight a tractor, down to about 15,000 pounds. Well, that's 2,000 pounds than maybe the standard tractor. So where they need to do it, they'll go do it. But the problem is that that's such a small volume, and the value outside of that small niche is pretty small, really.
Well, and there's complexities within that, right? So the bulk hauler that you're talking about that will pay $8 to $12 per pound is a number I heard for light weighting, which to me is the highest number I've ever heard in a ground vehicle in my entire life.
Yeah.
Military doesn't pay that. They're like 3 to 5. Light automotive is about $1. So 8 to 12 for a bulk hauler for light weighting is really high. However, there's scenarios like cryogenic fluids where I'm thinking of the fifth wheel, right? The aluminum fifth wheel that you could get at a premium. However, their legal team won't allow an aluminum fifth wheel, even because even if it could pass every test on rollovers and so on, they don't trust it. They say, forget it, we're going to steel. So there are all these other issues with the same conversation in that cryogenic bulk hauler. A lightweight bumper might allow a deer to, you hit a deer, get jammed into the wheel and cause a rollover. So nope, can't do that and have a big steel bumper as low as possible. So there's always these issues, these other complications that prevent some really nice lightweighting options, even on the vehicle that really needs it the most.
Yeah, so you helped us author a lightweighting confidence report, and then we updated it a few years later. It may be 5, 6 years old now, and maybe we should look at it again, Andrew. But one other thing that I remember is we were sort of forecasting or wondering if there were dynamics that were going to require, not that 5% that grosses out every trip. The next group, we concluded that there were dynamics in freight movement that meant that we would need more lightweighting components across the broader spectrum of Class 8 heavy duty tractor production. So we were thinking that tractors and trailers might even get even heavier. Here we are. We've got electric trucks that are 3 to 4 to 7 or 8,000 pounds heavier, depending on the size of the battery, than a requisite diesel. We've got trailers that are looking at putting batteries on trailers and adding weight to trailers for either power for refrigeration, or potentially helping to propel the truck and use less power at the tractor. So and then finally, this load matching and trying to get more freight in each trailer, where the average payload in the truck, we hypothesized or predicted that was going to go up over time with, just better data, and being able to load match and all that kind of stuff out in the real world. Um, do you think those are coming to fruition? I mean, are you seeing a little bit more, if not a lot more, emphasis on lightweighting of the general tractor, because occasionally the load grosses out, or are we not seeing what we thought we might see?
Well, on the trailer side, there's a really neat technology. They call it origami. It's a core with skins that can save up to 2,000 pounds on the walls and roof
Mhm.
of a trailer. The innovation engine never stops, right? Also, I think just there's continuous progress, and it's really important to keep an open mind. So let's say your fleet 20 years ago, everybody had a sleeper cab. Well, does that mean the new generation wants to be in a sleeper cab? Or would they rather stay in a hotel, and they're more likely to stay on board if you give them that option? So if that's an option, boom, you go into a day cab and you save 1,000 pounds. So
Yeah.
so you got to be open minded about your drivers, how the business can change, and also these new materials coming out and new solutions coming out.
Very interesting. We've seen a movement to 4x2s by some fleets. So, they were buying 6x4 axles because just occasionally they needed the larger uh, weight carrying capacity. But they looked at their business and they're like, you know what? That's only like 3% of our loads. Why are we buying all these axles and going through the maintenance and repair of them and weight and so forth? So let's just buy 4x2s, buy some 6x4s, deal with the increasing complexity of their fleet, but save some money and so forth. So I think I think we're seeing a little bit of this, maybe not as much as we thought back in the day, but a little bit. Hey, I want to switch gears on something because you always been a sort of a hero for mine with respect to remote work. So when I first met you, you'd settled in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. I call that heaven on earth for the month of July and maybe a couple days in June, a couple days in August.
I forgot about February, but go on.
Yeah, yeah. You've never had me visit in February. Letty and I did visit you in June one time.
Yeah.
But you decided early in your career to go. I suppose that's back home, work out of your house way before the NACFE team started doing it, way before the pandemic. Why did you do that? First of all, what motivated you to do that? And, when you look back on it, do you kind of think you're on a leading edge of something that a lot more people are doing today? Or just how do you think about that?
I was up here already, so I left 3M in Livonia and moved up here to UP, which is home for me and my wife. And I was at an engineering firm, and then decided 6 years after that to start my own company. So when you start a consultancy in a new company, you got to keep your costs low. So I was working in my basement, and at the time I had some local clients, but I've always had over 16 years far away clients, whether it's Wisconsin or for 5 years I had a client in Brazil. So it just works. And there's no commute. It's super flexible and it's super efficient. So those are the upsides for sure. The downside is there's very little in-person interaction, like literally people to people, which doesn't work for everybody. I've been able to get it to work, but when I do get to a trade show, it's like, whoa, there's people, and a lot of the interaction is phone and video calls, and the other thing, just the nature of my work is, if nobody ever calls me ever, so I'm always got to be the initiator, and that's just the way it is when you're working by yourself remotely.
My journey's kind of the same. I mean, when I left Navistar in 2009, one of the first things I did was clean out the living room, bought a desk, put an office in there, and started working. And the first few weeks it was a little hard. There was always the pull to go, catch up on TV or go to a kids game in the middle of the afternoon or something. And you're able to do that if you can and work around it, but it does take. And I think the pandemic, when all of a sudden a big portion of the workforce were working at home, I think a lot of us looked at ourselves and looked back on those times and said, boy, that was for me or that wasn't for me. I need people. I need to bump into people at the water cooler. I can't really do this. And for them, I think now, a couple of years since the pandemic, they're probably looking at jobs where they're going into the office most of the time, even for jobs that could be remote. But I think it is really good for business when the match of a employee's personality works in that lifestyle, and you have really happy employees, and then you're not dealing with, you have some decreased costs, like you mentioned, in facilities and so forth. Travel can be a little more expensive sometimes when you're a little more remote, but technology's kept up with us, right? I mean, we can put, I mean, heck, I do video conferencing and all my TV streaming and everything out of a motorhome. So the technology has allowed us to do this. And I think it's kind of fascinating who takes advantage of it, who decides it's not for them, and everybody in the middle figuring it out.
For me and my business, I'm involved in metal castings, extrusions, and AI. And so to have a variety, it's really smooth at home. But if I look at a company, one of my clients, and trying to manage the other two would be very uncomfortable.
Let me ask you about sustainability. How is lightweighting and just general sustainability for businesses, whether they're a fleet, a truck builder? Are you seeing a linkage there? I mean, should there be one in your mind or not? And is that something that more of us should be talking about?
Where I see sustainability is in the metals. So I'm involved in metals, steel, iron, aluminum, and there's always been a big push for, if you had a pound of metal, a pound of aluminum, I can talk most intelligently about aluminum. So if you had a pound of aluminum, how much of that pound is recycled content? How much is primary? So certainly if it's recycled, it's already been produced. It's very easy to, and low energy to grab the recycled content, whether it came from the butt end of an extrusion or an engine block or somewhere like that, and input that and do that. So that's always been a push. And I worked for a major aluminum producer as a contract guy, right? Doing business development. And that was the single biggest thing I learned was, wow, every one of these car parts, they're trying to get as much recycled content in there as possible. And that was all purely a cost push. But now that there's real metrics behind sustainability, it upped the ante. And so,
So like a truck wheel, if you compare aluminum versus steel, what's the percent recycled material in a typical aluminum versus steel?
I think they're actually pretty close. I think it's roughly 75% recycled.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it comes down to the performance metric. So I happen to represent aluminum foundry that does a lot of military work. I'd say theirs is about 0% recycled because when you recycle aluminum, it brings in more iron, and it just comes along for the ride as a necessary evil. And the more iron you got, the worse your properties are. So there's a lot of difficult, challenging aviation and military type applications that can't have iron. And so you just can't use that recycled content. So it really comes down to it. But there's a lot of work. And even if I put my AI hat on, we're doing a lot of machine learning type projects with people to help them get to the properties they want with the chemistries that would bode well to both saving money and sustainability.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, hey, we're running out of time, Andrew. This is really, really interesting. And really, anybody listening, you can reach out to Andrew through NACFE or directly if you'd like. I mean, what's the best way to do that, Andrew? You have a website?
Yeah, and lightweighting.co.
Oh, that's easy. Lightweighting.co, and you can reach out to Andrew if you're interested in anything we've talked about. So, last question. I ask a form of this probably like I asked that first question about how we met. This is kind of a typical one, but these are challenging times. There's a lot going on. There's a new administration, regulations. You brought up AI and how that's sort of challenging all of what we do, or giving us opportunities to do things differently. I mean, with all this change, how do you personally, or how do you suggest the rest of us look at these and as these kind of, I don't know, crazy or unsettled times, or whatever you want to talk about, and turn them into opportunities and help us rather than, be a problem? How do you do that?
Take a deep breath, be patient, focus on what you want to do, find the data, and with the truths, build your business case around it.
That's really, really good advice. Hey, thank you a lot, Andrew.
That was fun. Thanks, Mike.
Freight efficiency with NACFE's Mike Rosen Friends.